Hi everybody, thank you very much for joining us today. Hopefully you can hear me all right and you can see us on the right hand side and you can see the slides. If you can't see us or hear us or see slides, please drop a message into the chat box and we'll have a look at that. So today we're going to be talking about how you can reopen safely. So if you've already reopened, it's a great reminder of some of the controls that you should have in place and how to keep your customers and your staff safe. And if you can't quite open just yet, it's a really good reminder of things you can kind of get in place when you're able to do so. So we're going to give you some top tips on how to reopen safely. We've got some additional information specifically focused on staff and management controls. We have guides and resources which we'll be sharing links to, which you'll be able to find in the webinar where you can find it on our website. And we've also created a number of services which can help you with your safety processes. So some introductions from us. I'm Dan, so I'm the head of marketing at Navitas, and I'm the host of this webinar, and I'm joined by Kirsty, who's our regional manager and a health and safety expert.
Good afternoon, everyone. As Dan's already mentioned, I'm Kirsty Jones. I'm a qualified environmental health officer. I've got over 10 years experience in local authority enforcement and just under 10 years experience with consultancy with the Navitas Group. We look after a wide range of clients and we look after businesses like cinemas, retail, contract catering, hotels, and we offer food, fire and health and safety advice.
Thanks, Kirsty. Yeah, so Navitas, if you haven't heard of us, we're a health, fire and food safety business, and we started off over 30 years ago as a consultancy business, so going into various different types of businesses and helping them with their safety processes in the form of audits and advice and support. And then what we've done is we've then branched out to provide technology solutions, so software, hardware technology to do everything like food temperature monitoring and compliance, and basically getting rid of all that paper-based compliance process that people are really reluctant to do, but I know it's a necessary evil. And we've basically created all these digital tools to make it really simple, and all of that's underpinned by our pedigree and all our expertise in food safety and health and safety. So just to kick us off, just so everyone's kind of aware, as we, at the time of creating this webinar, this was the correct government's phased reopening plan. So as you know, things like hardware stores, garden centres are all reopened. This week we had things like cafes, pubs, non-essential shops opening, so like clothing stores and stuff like that. And we're kind of moving into phase 3 now, where it's 4th of July for England and 15th for Scotland, and this is where we're looking at the reopening of cafes, pubs, restaurants, and providing on-premise food and drink. And we're also expecting hotels and hostels and things of that nature to also open at that time. But obviously these reopening are only with restrictions in place for social distancing, really strict cleaning and hygiene processes. That's why some of the expertise we're going to be going through shortly is really important. And things like risk assessments as well, because you must have a risk assessment in order to reopen. And then kind of going on through July, these dates aren't confirmed yet. So we did look at this last night just before this webinar to see if we had anything more up to date, but unfortunately the government hasn't released any concrete rules for when things like hairdressers and beauty salons and stuff like that can actually open, but we're expecting it to be sometime in July. And that's the same goes for gyms and stuff like that as well. And then we're looking at kind of very much the end of July into August for things like tattooing and piercing. So more loosening on those rules. But again, they haven't announced specific deadlines for this yet. So we'll just wait and see what's happening. And obviously we'll be updating our advice and guidance along with anything that's released. So I'm just going to hand over now to Kirsty, who's going to start taking you through our top tips for how you can reopen safely. And if you do have any questions, we have a Q&A box here, so if you just drop your question to that, and then what we'll do is we'll come to them at the end if you do have to answer any of your questions.
Sorry about that. So as Dan mentioned, we are progressing progressing through the stages of the timeline, with non-essential shops opening at the beginning of this week, which is great. The phased reopening will be kept under close review though, due to the seriousness of the pandemic, obviously. So the sectors that are being left or last are the sectors that are more difficult to control in terms of longer term exposure within group gatherings and enclosed spaces. So the likes of restaurants, hotels, etc. Obviously those that haven't been open for key workers, they will be towards the latter end of this phase return. We will continue to be guided by science and case numbers to try and avoid that second peak, and there may be some adjustments along the way. So if we see that the controls aren't working or the phased reopening isn't working effectively, then there may be some adjustments that are needed along the way. We have produced some general reopening guidance, which is quite a useful document to go through absolutely everything that you will need to look at when you are ready for reopening your business. But today we are really focusing on the COVID controls that you'll need to have in place. So for the purposes of this webinar, we've summarised 7 things that you can do in advance. The first one is to temporarily change the way you operate and consider delivery. If you haven't already done that, you might think it's a little bit too late to make those adjustments. But if you do want that revenue stream to continue to come in, you can look at adjusting the way you operate and perhaps shifting to online sales, or looking at a takeaway operation if you were a closed cafe, for example, or restaurant. So a lot of our smaller retail shops had moved over to selling their wares online quite successfully. So it fits in well with the contactless requirements for COVID controls. And some businesses have started to do front door sales for takeaways, for example, and others are starting to think about selling gift vouchers in preparation for reopening. So that first step, really, if you wanted to, you could temporarily change the way you operate. You would have to consider back of house. If you are a restaurant and you wanted to move to a takeaway operation, for example, you would have to make sure that you've got the right COVID controls in place for the kitchen. Don't forget the guys that are working behind the scenes in the kitchen. If it's a small premises, you will need to consider how you use the space effectively, and if it's a very small premises, you would have to have quite strict queue management controls in place, and almost a 1 in 1 out system if required. So with regards to takeaways have continued to trade right the way through. If you want to temporarily adjust to takeaway provision, you can do that. The regulations with regards to planning have been relaxed quite a lot, and you would just need to let your environmental health department know locally to be able to do that. So the regulations around planning are much more relaxed at the moment, but you will need to let the planning department know if you do want to consider that. Customers can enter your premises for takeaway collection, but nothing can be consumed on site. One thing to bear in mind at the moment, as Dan mentioned, the garden centres and other non-essential shops have opened, but with garden centres, if they do have a cafe, they are only allowed to have takeaway services only. So if they've got a seating area, they're not able to make that available. So there's no inside or outside seating allowed at the moment for takeaway services. So just looking at the second thing that you can do to plan for reopening, in our guidance we've come up with an idea about designating a COVID champion. So, you know, everybody's commitment is required for reopening. It's important that everyone has that commitment, and everyone is aware of what the requirements are when you are ready to open, when you are able to open. So all staff must be provided with COVID awareness training and training in the controls that you select ready for reopening. What we've suggest is that you have either one person or a number of people, if it's a large operation, set up as a safety team or a COVID champion, so a go-to person that oversees the management of COVID controls within the workplace, within the business. It's a great opportunity to ensure controls are monitored. So we would say to designate a COVID champion to actually monitor that your controls are being implemented and maintained correctly, and that should be on a daily basis, on an ongoing basis. So it allows for that really close monitoring, and it also, within our compliance services that we've got available online, we have implemented or made available a monitoring checklist, which is really good. It's really easy to use. You can use it on an app, on a tablet, on your phone. So once you reopen and you've chosen those controls that you need, it's a really good way of making sure that they are monitored regularly. One thing to bear in mind is that your insurers will want to know exactly what you're doing in terms of maintaining those controls and making sure everybody's safe. So you will be expected to demonstrate that you have evidence to show that you are monitoring that those controls are effective. Having a COVID champion also gives ownership, accountability, and it assists in providing reassurance to everyone really that you are taking this seriously, and that you, both your guests, your customers and your staff and any other visitors to the business are going to be safe when they're there. So it provides for continual review and continual improvement, so you can adjust your controls if you find that they're not working properly. So if you find something wrong when you're carrying out the monitoring, you can then review and adjust accordingly. It also provides, as I mentioned, that go-to person. So if a staff member has an issue, if they've got a concern at work, or if a customer observes something that they're not happy with when they're in the business, then they are the go-to person. They can act as a coordinator. So we think it's a really good idea to have a COVID champion in place within the business, ready for reopening. The third element to look at is cleaning, sanitising and hand hygiene. It goes without saying that this is extremely important with regards to any infection control, not just for COVID, but with regards to any type of infection control. There's an expectation that cleaning, hygiene, sanitising, everything related to cleanliness will be enhanced within the business. There will be a massive customer expectation linked to this, so you need to be able to demonstrate that you have enhanced all your cleaning regimes, you're using the right cleaning product, and that you've got documented evidence to show what you're doing. So you will have to have enhanced cleaning schedules in place. This will form part of your risk assessment and your due diligence to show that you are cleaning and sanitising everything correctly and at the right frequency. Frequency is a good discussion point at the moment. So in our guidance, we've recommended cleaning and disinfection of environmental surfaces, touch points every 30 minutes. And just so it's simple, we say hand washing for 20 seconds. So we've suggested every 20 minutes. So we've got like a 20-20 rule. Hand washing as often as you can. But in our guidance, we have suggested every 20 minutes. Touch point cleaning is really, really important. We encourage hygiene sessions throughout what we call the journey and the staff journey. So looking at both aspects really, if you've got quite a large business where you have staff clocking into work, we would expect a hygiene station located there and right the way through the business. So it's good to walk through your business from the front door right the way through and make sure that you've considered about hygiene and cleanliness, and making sure you've considered the hygiene stations, because it's very visible for the customers, and it's also a great reminder that to the staff that they should be using the cleaning products regularly as well. Hard and soft surfaces do need to be cleaned and sanitised. If you've got a business that's a restaurant, for example, or a hotel, or just generally an area that's quite highly decorated with fabrics, you will need to consider how those fabrics are going to be cleaned and disinfected. So we've actually partnered up with a company that offer a fogging service, so they can do environmental deep cleaning of the premises as well on a regular basis to make sure that everything is thoroughly cleaned and disinfected. Hand washing, we suggest or recommend in our guidance that you use a timer system. I think that works quite well, especially in food service. Food service, it goes without saying that hand washing is important anyway, but a lot of our clients have put a timer system into place where everyone will wash their hands routinely when a timer goes off. So that might be something you want to consider if you've got quite a large number of staff members to sort of oversee and manage from that perspective. Cleaning chemicals should be virucidal. Now, if you are a food operator, you'll be quite used to using bactericidal products, but we do need to ensure that that your existing sanitizer, your food safe sanitizer, is bactericidal and virucidal. If it isn't, then we would suggest that you get an additional product that is a virucidal that you can use in addition to your normal food safe sanitizer. So what we would suggest there is that you do contact your cleaning supplier and re-establish those supplier relationships as soon as you can. That's something we've popped into our general opening guidance as well, to re-establish contact with your suppliers, because we know supplies will be quite difficult in some areas with resources being quite low and restricted, and certainly cleaning products being in very high demand. So again, we would recommend get in touch with your provider as soon as possible and double check what products you're using already and whether you need to get a virucidal product in addition to use to make sure that you've covered the cleaning effectively. Contactless is so important. We'll come on to it shortly when we talk about social distancing and contactless processes. So even with things like cleaning, disinfection, hand hygiene, hand sanitizing, if you can have contactless dispensers that are sensor operated, for example, that is really, really good to avoid the frequent touching of what we call high touch points. Cleanliness at every stage is really important. So even at delivery stage, in our guidance, we are suggesting that you should have designated delivery arrangements. So delivery drivers only coming into restricted areas of the property. Again, we recommend that you contact your suppliers in advance and let them know what your procedures are so they know what to expect when they arrive. And also that you have a designated team member to receive the delivery, decant as much as possible, and obviously maintain those hygiene procedures right from the start, right from the delivery point, right the way through the business. Again, that would be covered in your risk assessment as well. Okay, so moving on to the fourth step. Oh, PPE. So when considering control measures, we should always have regard to what we call the hierarchy of control. So any good risk assessment will always have reference to what we call the hierarchy of control. Now, elimination and substitution are always the first things that you need to look at when you're considering hazards within a business. It would just be great to eliminate COVID, wouldn't it? If only it was that simple. However, when you look at the hierarchy of control, PPE has always been the last resort, because there's so many factors to consider. You know, will the staff use it properly? Will it be maintained? There's so many variables to consider. So PPE is a massive discussion point at the moment. Obviously, social distancing is the best control measure, but you may need to consider PPE with certain tasks within the business or with certain areas within the business. So if you've got a very small area where you know that for service delivery you might need to have more than 2 people in the vicinity to work, you may have to consider PPE. If you can't also consider changing the working arrangements and the rota, which we'll talk about later. So you might have very small areas, work areas within the business. You might have corridors where you'll have people passing each other, we call them within the layout of the premises. And you may have people doing more higher risk tasks like bedroom cleaning, for example, or cleaning after exposure to someone who's suspected or confirmed to have had the virus. So there will always be requirements where you need to consider PPE, or circumstances where you need to consider. And what we suggest is, we've got them listed here: disposable gloves, face mask and headwear as applicable, but the focus really is on disposable. It's a very debatable topic. From Monday, we all now have to wear face coverings on public transport. Obviously, face coverings are very different to face masks, and there's a lot of discussions on face visors as well, and whether they afford any protection or some protection, and also other factors to consider within a business. So we need to think about availability. I've already mentioned about resources and stock being quite difficult to get hold of, and obviously NHS and key workers do take priority when it comes to PPE, so you may not be able to get hold of PPE very easily. The type of PPE, again, we've had questions from our clients about whether they should be disposable, whether they can use reusable PPE like reusable face coverings, etc. And then you've got to consider the welfare and the comfort of the user. So if you're in a hot kitchen for an 8-hour shift, is a visor and a mask going to be comfortable? And you know, when you weigh out the effectiveness of the control, you know, is it something that you need to put into place? What are the customer expectations? What are the staff expectations? We have had instances where we've heard that staff are happy to return to work. They're saying they're happy to return to work, but only on the proviso that they will have PPE provided. And in that case, if there is a specific request, then that would have to be fulfilled. And some companies are saying that they will have the PPE available, but it will be used on a voluntary basis. So there is an awful lot of discussion around PPE at the moment, and it is very much down to risk assessment, which we'll talk about shortly. I think with regards to customer expectation, from personally, I'm guessing that it will become an expectation that people will expect, especially in restaurants and busier enclosed spaces. Hopefully when we get back to some kind of normality, I think the PPE and seeing staff wearing face masks is going to be you know, the new normal and the new customer expectation. But we don't know for sure at this stage, and I think the only thing to do is to conduct a risk assessment and make sure you've gone through all of those factors that need to be considered with regards to the provision of PPE. Just on PPE as a final point, do remember that PPE is not always obvious. So uniform is part of a staff member's PPE. Uniforms should be laundered on a hot wash, ideally every day or as frequently as possible. And in our guidance, we have suggested that uniforms shouldn't be taken home as far as possible. So if you haven't already got a laundry contract in place, it is really strongly recommended that you have a look at doing that. We're not saying that staff can't take their uniforms home to wash, but if they do, then we would suggest you have a set of instructions available to the staff to show them or inform them how to do that properly. And they must always change into their uniform on arrival at work and change out of their uniform before they go home. So we would suggest that you, if you don't set up a laundry contract, that you put a set of instructions together for your team so they know exactly what the expectations are with regards to washing uniform and storing it at work. So risk assessment, moving on to the fifth step that we consider. Now this is vital. There's been a real, when we've seen the phased reopenings that have taken place already, there has been a real focus on risk assessment. As Dan mentioned at the very start, everybody, every employee, every business must have a risk assessment. So we're all aware that general work activities need to be risk assessed, and you do have to have your risk assessments written down if you employ more than 5 members of staff. So the same would apply here. We have risk assessment templates online. We've developed COVID specific risk assessment templates for different work tasks and different work areas by sector. So that's something that Dan will talk about later on within these slides. But as an employer, you are required to obviously make sure everybody is protected whilst they are within your premises. So with regards to risk assessment steps, you've got to identify how COVID-19 could cause harm in your business as a hazard. You've got to decide how likely someone could be harmed and how seriously. So we've got to look at the risk that is posed, and then we've got to take action to control the risk of COVID-19. So again, the risk assessment framework should be followed when looking at coronavirus specifically. The risk assessment will be your evidence that you've addressed all of the business. It is your due diligence, so it is legally required, and a lot of businesses now are actually publishing their risk assessments on their websites and across social media. Now we're getting to the sort of 4th of July where hotels, restaurants, cafes are starting to reopen. They're really focusing on pre-communication to their customers to give that reassurance that everyone is going to be safe when they come back into the business. So it is really important that that aspect is documented, and it brings up together all of your decision making for your controls. So you're verifying that, you know, you're confident that the level of control that you're putting into place is going to be suitable and sufficient. Just a couple of notes on the slide deck here. Quick shutdowns are risky. So if you were a pre-existing business and you had a very quick shutdown at the beginning of March, the business, there may be some issues within the business when you do reopen. So again, just some examples here, predominantly linked to food operations, for example, but you may have left oil in fryers, or you may not have cleared a fridge out properly, or you may have left some rubbish in the business. So if the close down was pretty quick, pretty rushed, and you haven't had a caretaker in the business, if it's just literally been locked shut, then there may be some issues there that you need to address, and risk assessment will help you evidence those and demonstrate that you've taken the necessary action. While we're talking about risk assessment, in terms of statutory documentation, in our reopening guidance, our general reopening guidance, we have put quite a bit of information in there about statutory testing. So if you literally did lock the doors shut and walk away, then there will be a lot of follow-up that's required before you actually open, in terms of making sure the water system is safe, your electric and gas provisions are safe, and your facilities are safe. So if you've got lifts, for example, or coffee machines, or any other additional pressure vessels and gas equipment, all of those are legally required to have statutory examination. So before reopening, I know we're a little bit off topic here with the COVID controls, but before reopening, it is so important to make sure that all your statutory certification and insurance documentation is up to date, alongside your risk assessments, your general risk assessments, and your general safety paperwork. So there's a lot to consider with risk assessment. Again, I would recommend that you walk the journey, the customer journey, the staff journey, consider all tasks that your staff are required to undertake, and consider all aspects that your customer will be potentially involved in, and make sure all of that is documented within your risk assessment. Okay, moving on to a very hot topic then, social distancing. We can learn a lot from supermarkets already in regards to things like traffic routes, direction of travel, separation at till points, and all of that we've incorporated into our different sector guidance documents that we've produced. signage is really important. Things like floor markers are really visual. So anything that's visual, we are encouraging a lot of visual floor markers, signage, queue management systems. So if you've got really busy areas within your premises, like a reception desk, or if you know that people are going to be queuing for changing rooms, for example, then that needs to be really well controlled. So we would suggest queue management in terms of physical barriers and signage, but also, if you can, the COVID champion may be able to take on that responsibility in that role. So have someone there to sort of coordinate and manage the customers and the guests within the property, if you know that there's going to be real busy peak points there. Floor markers and signage could be branded to your company, so you could incorporate your company logo into the signage. That's quite popular at the moment, to actually incorporate branded or logoed signage and floor markers into the business, which is quite good. Seating arrangements, so if you've got reception area, breakout area, staff room, restaurant, you've really got to consider the distancing within those areas. You may have to change the layout completely, so you may have to start to look at things like removing tables to ensure separation. You might have a gym facility, for example, where you have to take equipment out because it's just there's too much within a confined space. So think about your capacity and think about the distancing, and reviewing the layout is something that you can do well before opening and get help to get that into place. With regards to restaurants in particular, with restaurants and seating areas, a lot of our clients have looked at actually having designated set down spaces at each table. So again, it helps maintain that physical distancing when you are, so you can still have the table service, but you are maintaining that distancing when you're actually going to take the food to the table and clear the table, although clearing of the table could be quite easily done when the guests have left. So think about table arrangements. Having set down space is a really good idea, and one-way systems as well. So if you can, if your business and size of property allows it, great to have a one in, one out. So one route in, one route out, a good flow, a good one-way system. And in the restaurant as well, if you have a restaurant business, in a restaurant you can look at the flow from service back through to the kitchen to pot wash, and try and ensure a good flow that way as well. Contactless operations. The more you can do to become contactless, the better. I mean, there's loads of technology out there these days, isn't there? I think it says on the slide here, cash exchange is almost going to be redundant, I think, eventually. So contactless payments have been increased. Hotels are looking at things like contactless check-in, contactless check-out. You can have orders being placed online. Even now in hotel rooms, you can turn on the TV using your mobile phone. So there's lots of things to consider to make your processes completely contactless, whilst obviously still maintaining that level of hospitality, because that's ultimately what we need to do in any business. But certainly contactless and contactless collection points is really, really popular as well. So setting up a designated area for collections. So you might sort of pre-order a meal at the table using an app, and then collect from a designated collection point. So that's definitely something to look into, and I think that's quite workable in almost all different types of businesses. We've spoken about distancing, and we've spoken about teams working together. If you can't socially distance within a team for a particular work activity, and it does form a massive part of your service provision, then you will need to really look at the rota and the way the teams work together. So you would look at things like working in set pod teams, so the same people are working together all of the time, so they only have that restricted exposure to the same people, and look at the way people work. So if they're used to working face to face, for example, with a set of desks, then look at rearranging that workspace so they can sit side by side or back to back if that's possible. And then ultimately, if you are struggling, then we might have to get down to looking at screening. Now, screening is good for things like reception areas, but we're still very unsure about what the government guidance will be ready for the 4th of July. So one of our clients has actually come to us and said, if we screen out the whole of our restaurant, absolutely everywhere, will we be okay? To be honest, we can't give you an answer to that at the moment. We know screens afford protection when you can't socially distance, but the government guidance may be quite heavily focused on capacity. So we wouldn't want to say, yes, go ahead and screen absolutely everywhere and you'll be fine, because the government may still say that you must only operate at a reduced capacity. And I think that's the indication we're getting at the moment, that will be one of the biggest controls when we do get to the 4th of July, hopefully, if that date does remain as planned. So at the moment, screening, I think, really should be limited and treated a little bit like PPE, to be honest. So think of that as the last resort for now, until we know a little bit more in terms of the government direction. Moving on to step 7, we've incorporated this as something that we can offer for you as a business. So once you've completed your risk assessment, you've decided on implementing your controls, you've trained them in with the team, they've got to be monitored. So there will be an expectation. I've already mentioned about the insurance companies expecting evidence of monitoring. So you will have to monitor internally, but external verification is important as well. Having an independent eye coming out to look at your business or to do a remote assessment to check that your selected COVID controls are suitable really does give that reassurance both to customers and staff. There will be a lot of uncertainty about staff returning to work. They may not feel overly safe. So the more that you can do to reassure your team, the better, really. So we felt that external verification would be quite a good method of giving that reassurance. So we've set up a certification scheme. A consultant will carry out a remote or on-site assessment to verify that your controls are in place and effective, and we will give you a certificate, and that certificate can be displayed in the business, a bit like a food hygiene rating. It can go on social media, it can go onto your website with your risk assessment and your safe operating procedures, again just to give that extra verification that you are taking all of your responsibilities seriously. We've mentioned, we're not quite sure what the new normal will look like. We've got an idea about what public expectations may be, but again, I think the certification does go in demonstrating that you have considered everything and that the workplace is a safe place to be. I think Dan's going to give some additional information on our certification scheme shortly. Okay, so just to look at some additional controls, just in a little bit more detail. I know I've spoken quite a lot already, but in terms of staff controls and management controls, so a couple of extra points just to talk through quickly here on staff controls. Travelling to and from work. So when you're looking at your risk assessment, your responsibilities do extend to giving staff information on travelling to and from work safely as well. So avoiding public transport wherever possible, encouraging use of private vehicles, although not great environmentally wise, but also cycling and walking to work. And staff it should be communicated to staff that there will be quite a flexible way of working to start with. So businesses should really consider flexible working hours, and the key thing here is to try and reduce the number of staff arriving at work all at once. So you've got an issue with crowding, with changing rooms, clocking in areas. I can imagine the larger operators will struggle quite a bit with this if they've got a big shift pattern and a massive workforce to try and control. But for small and medium-sized businesses, I think it's a little bit more manageable. So reviewing the rota for sure, and making sure that you do have that staggered work pattern wherever possible. Health declaration, really important that everybody coming back to work completes a health declaration and a return to work form. So this verifies that they are fit to work. So there will be questions on there, or there should be questions on there. We've got a sample one available within our guidance document. So there should be questions on there about whether they've suffered any symptoms within the last 14 days, and whether anyone within their household has suffered any symptoms. So you need to make sure that prior to returning to work, the staff are all fit to be back at work. And it also picks up on whether there's any vulnerable staff that should be shielding, that shouldn't actually be in the workplace. So anybody that has got any underlying health conditions, for example, who are at risk, shouldn't be back in the workplace. So the staff screening is really important, and staff can be trained before they come back to work. If they're on furlough, they are able to train. So you can do online training with them, and also online declarations as well in advance. If you can't, then certainly on day one, we would expect day one reopening, a staff briefing to take place. So everybody, you know everybody is fit to work, and you know that everybody is aware of what your expectations are when they start back. Reporting illness. So again, as part of the awareness training that you have a duty to provide to your teams, we would expect that your staff know what their responsibilities are with regards to reporting illness, and with regards to the self-isolation requirements within the government guidelines. There's a reminder there of the main symptoms of coronavirus: high temperature, new continuous cough, and one that was added more recently is the loss or change to your sense of smell or taste. So that was a more recent addition. So really, obviously, where members of staff do report to you, or if they come up with any adverse answers on their health declaration, you then need to have a management plan in place, an action plan in place. So with regards to your risk assessment and your safe operating procedures, we would expect you to have an action plan to cover this scenario where someone reports that they've had symptoms in the workplace, or someone reports that they have had symptoms previously on a health declaration. So where a member of staff has reported symptoms, you need to action that with regards to any areas of the business that they've been working in and exposed to, in terms of deep cleaning and monitoring other staff within that same work area as well that may have potentially been exposed. Thanks, Dan. So just moving on to management controls, we've mentioned reducing staff levels on site. So as far as possible, I mean, we are still encouraging people to work from home wherever possible. So if you can look at reducing your staff levels to start with, that is a really good control measure in itself. So we've spoken about reduction in numbers of staff, staggering start and finish times, and reviewing the rota and shift patterns as well wherever possible. Staff training we've already spoken about. So prior to commencement of work, online training can be provided to staff that are furloughed. We have a couple of online training courses available that do cover COVID awareness and COVID awareness in the workplace as well. And staff should just generally be regularly reminded what their duties are and what their responsibilities are. And this would all be part of your continual monitoring when you are up and running again. Okay. And then just to cover emergency situations, we have had a couple of questions in the past about what to do in an emergency. In a fire evacuation situation, you wouldn't have to remain 2 meters apart if it was life critical, if it was a fire life safety issue. People who are required to assist others during evacuation, like fire marshals, should obviously have those extra hygiene facilities available. So if you've got an evac bag, for example, and you have people who have designated roles to assist anyone with any needs during an evacuation, such as a wheelchair user, then you would have to review that documented evacuation plan and make sure you've got the right equipment and facilities within that evacuation bag. First aid, if you have qualified first aiders at work and their certificate has expired within the last 3 months, you are able to get an extension. You can apply for an extension of that certificate through your provider. So obviously practical courses aren't taking place at the moment. Delivered courses aren't available, so you can apply for an extension to your first aid qualification certificates. Think about CPR, administration of first aid. Obviously close contact is unavoidable in those situations, so that is where PPE would certainly be required, but first aid provision and administration should also be covered within your risk assessment as well. We've put on here on this slide that CPR should be compressions only, but that's not as effective with children. So you will have to cover that in detail in your COVID risk assessment as well, and review any documentation and safety procedures you have in regard to emergency situations and crisis management. So if you've got a full crisis manual, we would recommend that you review that as well in relation to COVID controls and reopening under these conditions. Ultimately though, emergency situations again does stem back to risk assessment and then training in with the team as well. Okay, I think I've covered everything. We have got some questions, but I think I'm just going to go back to Dan and then we'll cover the questions at the end. Thank you very much.
Thanks, Kirsty. Yeah, I've seen there's a few questions that have popped up. Don't worry, we'll come to those at the end. So I'm just going to quickly whiz through some of the resources and services and things we can help you with, because obviously we've talked about lots of different things here, and a lot of people worry that, oh, I'm not sure what to do first, I need some help. So we've put together these services to help you. So first ones are, we've got a range of guides and risk assessments that are available. So we've got a general guidance, which is obviously free of charge, but we do have specific guidance for different types of industries. And this ranges from obviously hospitality and catering, pubs, offices, non-food retail, so things like shops, food retail, so supermarkets and things of that nature, hotels, hairdressers, because obviously they will need more stringent controls, and also vending machines, because some of our customers asked about support for what they should do with vending machines. If your industry isn't on here or you're unsure where you would fit it in, please reach out to us and we'll be able to guide you on which guide and risk assessment is the most appropriate for you. So as I mentioned, we do have some free services and resources. So you can find these on our website. So if you go to navitas.eu.com, you'll see right in the menu bar, there's one called COVID certification. And if you go in there and in prices, there's a free package which covers our COVID-19 awareness course, which is very much an introduction and for awareness purposes about what COVID is, how to spot the symptoms, and kind of general basic information on how you can keep yourself safe and those around you. And we also have our COVID-19 general guidance, which is still quite comprehensive, but kind of covers all of the checklists that you could kind of follow and helps guide you through. So in terms of paid services, we have 4 main services, and these are COVID control certification audit. So this has been super popular, and all the feedback we've had have been rated 5 stars in terms of reviews. And what our consultants will do is they will either join you online, and all you'll need is a mobile phone, a tablet with internet connection, and they'll walk through your business and look at the controls that you've put into place, or you're planning to put into place, and they will assess that using our own self-created audit template, which has been created in line with the government guidelines up to date as of now, and then our health and safety best practice as well. And again, Kirsty touched on this before, but the whole point of this is to really give you guys the confidence that the controls you've got in place are going to keep people as safe as possible. They're legally compliant with what the government has asked for, and it's something then you can display to customers, your staff, or anyone, and provides that level of confidence that they're safe to basically enter your business. We've also got the return to work course, so that's much more detailed than the awareness course, and teaches staff specifically about their responsibilities when they return back to work, what they should be doing, how things have changed, what they can and can't be doing, and we, as kind of comes under part of your risk assessment, you can say that you've sufficiently trained your staff on their responsibilities and how to keep safe and their customers safe as well. And then, now, as I touched on earlier, right at the beginning of this presentation, we have a load of health and safety software and technology to help you with all these processes. And what we've done is created some COVID-specific digital checklists and guidance, and all of your risk assessments can be stored within our compliance software. So what that basically means is you've got a transparent 24/7, always available record of all the compliance processes that you've put into place in your organization. All these checklists can be done on a tablet, a mobile phone, and we've got an app. It's really simple. A COVID champion can complete the checks every single day. And as a business, you can show your insurers and any interested stakeholders that you've completely covered all of your safety practices and you've maintained them. So if you are open, you can kind of invest in this software now and get into your business and keep a record of that moving forward. So it's really watertight, basically. And then anyone who's reopening, it's a great time to look at some software solutions to first and foremost get rid of all that paper-based old-fashioned processes and make it digital, much more efficient, and saves hours and hours and hours of time. But again, it's just gives you that accountability and traceability and reassurance that everything's been done correctly. And then finally, we've partnered with a COVID-19 disinfection service company. So as we mentioned about hotel rooms and things like that, with lots of fabrics and things that would be very difficult to clean en masse and regularly, they can come in and do a complete fogging of your premises and make sure that all COVID is destroyed. So we'd recommend this for anything with like high traffic, lots of soft furnishings, or certainly any businesses that have had a known COVID case on their premises. So in terms of pricing, as I said, we do have the free stuff, which is part of our COVID aware package. So feel free to take advantage of that. We've had thousands of people have enrolled into our courses, downloaded guidance and stuff like that, and found it really, really helpful. But if you do need to we want to add further control to your business, we do have the industry specific guides and the risk assessments that are required by law for reopening of your business. And you'll also get the return to work course and our mental health awareness course with that control package. So it's kind of gives you all the information to be safe, has your risk assessments, and kind of is a perfect way to guide you through your reopening or making sure if you've already opened that everything is in place and is correct. And then finally, the certified package is where you get everything else in the other packages, but we'll also do the remote audit. This is where you get the certification. An auditor like Kirsty will come and observe the controls that you've put in place at your business, and then you'll be rewarded with a certificate to prove that obviously the controls are in place and you've satisfied the audit. So this is very similar to a food safety audit where an inspector would come in, have a look at your controls and make sure that everything is how it should be and give you basically a rating, but we would give you a certificate. Unlike an environmental health one, it's not as scary or intense where they'll come in and could shut down your business. There's nothing like that. We're there to actually help. So if something isn't quite right that should be in place, we'll advise you there and then if we can sort everything out. And again, we'll work towards you passing that audit. And And so far, nobody's failed their audit. We've helped everyone, and everyone who's taken an audit has obviously passed and got the certification. And as I mentioned before, it's been super popular, and everyone's been praising basically the audit and saying how helpful the walkthrough is. So a couple of additional bits. So if you didn't want a remote one, we could do one on site. So this is perfect if you're a huge business. So we've had a few like resorts and stuff like that want to do an on-site one, because it's much easier for Kirsty to kind of walk through a resort, because obviously if she's traipsing up and down tennis courts and stuff like that, it's not really appropriate with internet connections on a mobile phone. So we can do that on site. That's $295 plus VAT. The disinfection service, just let us know if you're interested in that, and then we can get prices which are specific for your business. If you are a big business, because our academy program and all training courses created by us, we do produce branded e-learning platforms for businesses that you can deliver a range of training, not just COVID. So we do food safety, health and safety, fire safety, mental health, some HR courses, a range of different pieces, and we can create bespoke courses for you as well. So if you are a bigger business and you would like to offer this bespoke branded e-learning package for all of your employees, please let us know, we can help you with that. And as mentioned, our compliance software, which is used by thousands of businesses, they have all of the COVID checklists, risk assessments, everything in there already, as well as health and safety, auditing, incident reporting, all these other things, all part of one central compliance software system. So we can also provide you with the compliance package and talk you through those as well. Okay, so I know we've got loads of questions, so I'm just going to have a look at the questions and start answering those. So if you've got any more that we've not touched on, please just drop them into the Q&A now, and we'll start going through them. See if, Kirsty, can you see the questions?
I can, yes. So we've got a question about, which is quite a specialist area, regarding an operator of a small studio that has customers come to the small studio to try on sample dresses. And there's a question with regards to provision of masks and any advice about touching the garments themselves. So in that scenario, again, risk assessment is important to consider all the risks and the level of exposure, both for yourself and for the customers coming into the studio. Certainly in that scenario where it's a one-to-one, that you ask the health declaration questions of the customer time of booking the slot, and also then really it would be down to the PPE, so disposable gloves and potentially masks. But I think one of the big control factors there is to do that screening with the customer before they even come to the studio, or at the time of booking, so you've got that confidence and that reassurance that they haven't had any exposure or symptoms themselves. So it would almost be down to them providing that declaration to you, so you can be reassured that you're not at risk as well within that close contact and close vicinity. Otherwise it would be masks and PPE, disposable gloves. And then with regards to touching the garments themselves, I would really recommend that is kept to a minimum. I know that's quite difficult, but without gloves, there is the issue about potentially if anyone is a carrier, they may be asymptomatic as well, which is very difficult to control. But if someone is a carrier and they have touched fabric garments, for example, that virus could potentially stay on that type of surface for up to 72 hours. So you may have to put a procedure in place where the garments you've used at one fitting session are then not used again for 72 hours. So put a rotation system in place, or look at having some kind of fabric disinfectant that you can use, as long as it's safe for the type of garments that you've got. We've got a question on someone who's clinically vulnerable and potentially being asked to come back to the workplace rather than working from home. Now, if your job is a job that you can do from home, then that is ultimately what you should be doing, and the employer should be totally on board with that, because the government guidelines are still very much focusing on the fact that if you don't have to go into work, then great, you can work from home, carry out your job quite safely in a home environment. If there is any sort of push for you to return to the workplace, then you would have to have a person-specific risk assessment carried out. Ultimately, if you are clinically vulnerable, though, when you fill out your health declaration, that will pick up on some of those key factors that should really discourage the employer from wanting you to be back in the workplace. So I think there the key thing would be to continue to work from home. We've had a question about cleaning, things like workstations, desks, bins, and how enhanced that should be. The government guidelines, as they usually are quite vague. They say enhanced cleaning and they say increased frequency, but they don't actually give examples of that. So our guidance has suggested every 30 minutes. We have seen other guidance documents like UK Hospitality, some of the hotel brands like the IHG, the Marriott's, they're saying we've basically got a variance between every 30 minutes to 2 hours. And it does depend on your availability of staff as well and how big the team are. So I know it's getting that balance right, because we're asking you to limit your staff in the workplace, but we're also saying increase the frequency of cleaning tasks. So it's getting that balance. But certainly for high touch points like stationery, desks, work equipment, we would say ideally every 30 minutes. But definitely at least every 2 hours. And with that, in our sector guidance, we have put some extra information in there about office space and workspace, and looking at designating desks, avoiding hot desking, for example, to try and control it in that way. But again, really we are looking at the frequency of cleaning if you can't have that total designation of workspaces. Someone's asked about meetings. So meetings and events, we would say that these need to be risk assessed individually per booking. So if you are a large event space, so for corporate bookings, for example, for meetings, each event would have to be risk assessed separately. So we have got a generic template available on our compliance system that you could use for that purpose. But each meeting would have to be risk assessed independently to capture everything relating to that booking. So room layout, who the company is that's requested the booking, what their relationship is with each other. Are they from the same company, etc., or are you having a huge amount of people coming together in one gathering? Food service provision across the day, that will all have to be incorporated into a event specific risk assessment. Someone's asked about wearing masks at work in an office environment. I think we have covered that. Again, I hate to keep saying it, but we're going back to risk assessment really, and it is under huge debate at the moment about what level of protection wearing a mask does give the wearer and the people around the wearer, and very much to be decided on staff and customer expectations really, and outcome of your risk assessment. Someone's asked if the webinar will be emailed. I think it's being recorded and it can be made available, can't it?
Yeah,
on the...
So the webinar has been recorded today, and it's going to be put live on the Westminster BIDS YouTube channel. That'll be available shortly after we finish today, and obviously we'll have all the questions. But if you do have any more specific questions or anything about what we've talked about, feel free to just drop us a message at hello@navitas.eu.com or visit the Navitas website, where all the things we've talked about is all on there under our COVID page as well.
Yeah, just another couple of quick questions that have just very recently been added. Can I ask for training on the COVID risk assessments now, so planning in advance? Yep, certainly. So any COVID related or any training can be done whilst you're on furlough. So if the company that you work for has already set out their COVID controls, and they've got a document or a set of SOPs and risk assessments, they can share them with you in advance, and that will put you in really good stead for knowing what to expect when you go back to work. Really good question here. I didn't cover this actually. My company works in a shared building occupying the entire 5th floor, and there are 12 floors altogether, and the lifts are an obvious concern and the stairs are narrow. Now this is very much down to the management company for the building. That would fall within their responsibility to ensure that the communal areas are managed and controlled effectively. So we would expect, depending on the size of the lift, you would reduce the occupancy or have a one in, one out system. I know that might be quite difficult with a 12-story office block, for example, but it's down to the management company to control those communal areas and manage that. So you'd have limited capacity in the lift, or if you were working in pod teams or from the same household working in the same premises, you could use the lift together. But ultimately it would be down to restricting capacity and having signage up to make sure everyone was aware of those controls. And with regards to the stairwells, I imagine a property of that size will have more than one stairwell. So if they're not just designated for fire evacuation purposes, they could look at having one stairwell up and one stairwell down and having a one-way system put into place. Again, if that isn't possible, some of our other clients have said that they will encourage people to keep to the left of the stairwell if they're going up, and if they see someone coming down, they will wait on a bigger part of the stairwell if possible. So it's very much down to the layout of the property, but there's some things to consider there. And then the final question, how would you manage the handling of post and packaging for an office? Again, with regards to handling, we would say disposable gloves. We would suggest, if it's a cleanable surface, a non-absorbent surface, that it is sanitized before it's touched. And if you can, and if your operation allows it, allow that 72-hour turnaround process again. So the packaging comes in, it's checked in, but it's not actually handled for ideally 72 hours, because that is the indication that we've got that the virus can potentially last on hard surfaces for. So hopefully, if you can, and I know it's not ideal because you do want to process post quickly, but if you can, I believe that the risk assessment outcome there would be to have a 72-hour holding period, and then you would be able to safely process that. Okay, I think that's all of the questions on the list, Dan.
Okay, great. So thank you everyone for the questions, and thank you for joining us. As I said again, if you want more information or anything we talked about today, please just go to the navitas.eu.com website, or please just reach out to hello@navitas.eu.com, and I will pick that up from there. But yes, so thank you very much for joining us, and hope everyone stays safe, and hope this has been useful.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. Bye, everyone.
Bye.